Well, hello there. Thanks for joining me today. I am going to be narrowly focused on two issues. I think it's two, but anyway, so I have more information to put this into context for the Weimar Republic and how some more details about all of that leading up to where we are today. And I uncovered something. Oh, and also there's a clip down below. We need to understand how trafficking of children is going on right now. So, before I get started, if you want to know more about my new cat studies, the official name of my study is this: Feline Radiation 5-Year Study. What am I going to do next? Well, I'm going to get it peer reviewed. I'm going to get some of my pals in the scientific community to say good things about my feline radiation 5-year study. Then I'm going to upload it to some professional researcher site. So then you can access my new study by paying a fee to take a look at it. So I'll be getting some money there. Cha-ching, cha-ching. Then next, I will be on speaking tours, getting a book deal, possibly a movie deal, and all of this about feline radiation. Yeah, pretty good, huh? That's how science works. I'm just following what they're doing, right? Next, I plan to study MSMD phenomena, studying humans instead of cats now that I am a published researcher on feline radiation. So because I published my feline research about the two cats in my house, I will get it peer reviewed and then I will move on to my new research study, which is MSMD phenomena. Because getting published and all that gives me some credentials amongst the rest of the gang doing reports and studies, right? So, my new study, MSMD, is about why do people admire psychopaths and want to mimic them? You're asking, well, what does MSMD mean? Well, it means monkey see, monkey do research project. For short, I will call it MSMD. Yes, I really want to study this monkey see, monkey do thing that's going on in society and how the full disclosure has been that it has been harming the children by all the parents doing the monkey see, monkey do, getting online, not having quite amount of time for the kiddos. And then, of course, money then enters into it. So that would be my new project. There is a monster problem going on. I think I can talk to you today about how we got here from Weimar to a little bit of activism along the way. They only started putting laws in place against trafficking for children around 1999, okay? It is a hiding in plain sight phenomena all around this country. But first, let me focus on the Weimar thing. They learned that the sexual revolution, in order to succeed, had to be a slow and gradual process, just like those frogs in the water, right? They set it up too fast. They got anxious. Well, a lot of them were on cocaine and stuff, so of course they're getting anxious, right? They come up with these horrific ideas and they're in a rush to implement them, right? The rush is on to get rid of the rest of us. Our silence is our compliance. I hate to tell it to you. There's only a couple percent of them, but we're sitting around watching them traffic children. We're sitting around watching them come down on us with more vaccines. They're going to be doing mandatory vaccines soon. Do you realize that I've been hearing some numbers about the children thing in this country? Now, nobody knows the real numbers. These are the numbers that I've been hearing over and over. They say that there are only about 300 beds in this country for traffic victims. They say that there are likely over 300,000 children in the United States, but no stats, and they've also been focusing on girls. I believe the problem is much bigger and includes the boys, and I'll get back to that later. Have to focus today. What are they doing? They're getting the kids to be sex slaves. Now they're letting the kids unaccompanied come into this country. They are passing laws saying, oh, yeah, we'll let the unaccompanied kids in. That is feeding the system. Sexual slavery, they can use a body over and over again. 7-year-olds, 14-year-olds is about the age they're looking for. They only claim to go against slavery. What we're talking about is slavery on such a massive scale in this country that it is really almost to the point that I have to be careful how I address this subject because I find it quite alarming thinking of all these children being trafficked and raped by these people, okay? Hollywood actually perverted what a sex trade victim looks like. They are not chained up in rooms, they are among us. Listen to this woman's story that I have down below. She describes from A to Z exactly how she became trafficked by a friend who introduced her to somebody else. So, our silence shows a solidarity with the predators. So if we are quiet, we are giving the predators the green light. I was raised in a family that kind of had this theory about the stiff upper lip, right? Well, put on your stiff upper lip. We have things to do today. Well, what does stiff upper lip mean? Well, it means to kind of deny what you're feeling, right? If you put on that stiff upper lip, it says keeping a stiff upper lip virtually means keeping your chin up. When someone gets worried or upset, their lip is going to shake and quiver. But if you're strong enough, you're going to have a stiff upper lip. I say we put on our stiff upper lips today and we explore and understand what is going on. If we don't understand what is going on, we will not be in a position to help any of these children. What's going to happen when lockdown comes? These kids will be locked in with their abusers. Just putting that out there, something to think about. So let me get back to this Weimar business. I found some more information. When many people think of LGBT history, they may look back to the Stonewall riots or possibly the work of the Matching Society. That's MATTACHINE Society in the United States as the beginning of the fight for equality. However, a significant piece of Western LGBT history began in Germany. First, in the mid to late 1800s, as researchers studied transgender and homosexual identities through a scientific lens. Then later in the period between the world wars, as Germans' LGBT community found more freedom to live out of the closet. In this interwar period, Germany had transitioned from an authoritarian monarchy into what we today call the Weimar Republic. It was a massive and social revolution that allowed some trans and queer people to live authentically. The liberal Weimar Republic ended with right-wing politics stirring up anti-Semitism, moral panic, fears of the Great Depression, the shame of having lost the Great War, and the threat of communist uprisings. But one of the great tragedies of the rise of the Nazis and the Holocaust was the nearly complete erasure of this brief gender and sexual revolution. Always pay attention when you're doing your own research, always pay attention to what they're hiding, or in this case, what they're burning up, right? These people have a tendency to burn up records. So let me explain why. There are several flashback scenes in the TV show Transparent that depict transgender people living openly in interwar Germany. I was amazed there could have been fully out trans people so long ago and in a place and time I thought was extremely conservative. After some research, I became fascinated about this period in LGBT history. So people who say they're transgender themselves are finding this history good, right? Well, good for them, right? So they went on to say, What made it more interesting was the fact that Hirschfeld's works were among the first items burned in the infamous Nazi book burning rallies. So, why, when the Nazis took over and started burning the books, why exactly did they head and burn up these particular books, right? The progress made at that time was largely erased and really only re-examined from a transgender perspective in the past couple of decades. Within the Weimar Project, they mentioned the magazine The Third Sex, which means transgenders. This magazine is an important piece showcasing the true scale of the degeneration of the Weimar Republic. So, they have stories that they were telling about people coming out as trans in some of these early trans things. They have this piece, and I'll read from it. It says, "A lost piece of trans history. A final movement of reluctance overcame me," Hans Pannenberg wrote, "as I stepped across the threshold of the house, dressed in a custom black dress, white gloves, and fine pearls. Hans Hannah looked impeccable. She cut a fine figure walking down the street, announced by a hint of perfume and the gentle jangling of bracelets. But Hans Hannah was anxious. This was her first outing as a woman. Hans Hannah wrote about the occasion for the inaugural issue of The Third Sex, and likely the world's first magazine devoted to trans issues. It was first published in Berlin, 1930. The Third Sex circulated in the final years of the Weimar Republic, Germany's democratic experiment between the wars. Did you hear that? The final years of the Weimar Republic, Germany's democratic experiment between the wars. The Third Sex revives lost voices from Germany's queer past and recovers a remarkable piece of trans history. Beginning in the 19th century, Germany was closely associated with homosexuality. The English spoke of the German custom. The French referred to vice allemande. The Italians called gay men and women Berlinese. Queer people existed across Europe, of course, but German thinkers actively studied non-heteronormative sexualities and openly debated the rights of queer people, inaugurating the field. Hold on a second, I got a cat running loose here. Get back, come on. Oh, there you go. Okay, I'm going to have to watch her for a second here. She almost got my chords and my keyboard there. I don't know, she just flies out of nowhere. But anyway, so let me get back here. If it keeps continuing, I'll have to take a break, and she's thinking I should stop and get her breakfast. Okay, so let me get back here. So the third sex. Queer people existed across Europe, and German thinkers actively studied these people, right? In the first decade of the 20th century, more than 1,000 works on homosexuality were published in German. Researchers from England to Japan cited German sexologists as experts and often published their works in Germany before their home countries. According to contemporary self-reports, some transvestites considered themselves homosexual, but most did not. Many wore clothes traditionally associated with the opposite sex, but only on special occasions. Others lived fully as a gender different from their sex at birth. A majority seemed interested in passing and adhering to expectations of respectability, while a minority sought to challenge the normative order. Gender affirmation surgeries were available. The first Such operation was conducted in 1920 by, no surprise, a German doctor. Boy, Germany's not looking too good, are they? Okay. To foster a trans community, he produced the third sex. Then, in January 1933, the Nazis seized power. Within months of Hitler's appointment as chancellor, the Nazis shut down many of the gay, lesbian, and transvestite clubs. Queer magazines were shuttered and queer titles removed from bookstores as part of the Nazis' campaign for a clean Reich. Anything deemed filth was banned from public view. In May of that year, Nazi students stormed Magnus Hirschfeld's Institution for Sexual Science and ransacked his library of more than 20,000 books. With help from the stormtroopers, they burned the books on the streets of Berlin, destroying much of the historical record of queer life before World War II. Noticing a trend? The Weimar Republic demonstrated all kinds of degeneracy, modernism, sexology, gender oddities, queerness, transgenderism, gender affirmation surgeries, pedophilia, ideas that we are currently plagued with. Our experience is not the first time this has occurred in history, nor will it be the last. When these sources discuss the Nazis' book burning, these kinds of books were the main books they burned. So, the students broke in on 6th of May, 1933, and took out the books. The institute was initially occupied by the German Student Union, probably a CIA operation. Good morning, Virginia. Who were a collective of Nazi-supporting youth. Several days later on, May the 10th, the entire contents of the library were removed to Berlin's Beckelass Square. That night, along with 20,000 other books across Germany, they were burned in a symbolic attack by Nazi officials on their enemies. So, I want to talk a little bit about this Magnus Hirschfeld person. Founded in 1919, the Institute had been set up by Magnus Hirschfeld, a world-renowned expert in the emerging discipline of sexology. And you need to remember the last show. Please keep in mind, I'm not going to be doing many recaps from here forward. I'm trying to relay to you what I know to date. So if you're wondering, well, why would she say that? Well, you got to keep up. You got to watch the shows and keep up, or you're going to be confused. And I can do nothing to help you, okay? You're on your own. You need to either hear the shows and keep rolling along with me, or you don't, because I'm not in any kind of position to be giving anyone recaps, okay? So, because in the last show, I talked about how this was all rigged. Every bit of this sex business was rigged by them. So if you miss that part, you're missing a key element in this entire story. That's all I'm going to say. So Magnus Hirschfeld, a world-renowned expert in the emerging discipline of sexology. Well, I'm likely going to become a world expert in feline radiology because, after all, I gave myself that position now, didn't I? Just like old Magnus Hirschfeld did. Just made it all up. Just like Robert Hare, this psychopath godfather. He just made it all up and nobody questions it, right? And I have information about that. I discovered last night exactly why the target is on my neck. Why do you think that everybody else can talk about what they want to talk about? And maybe they'll get punished. Maybe they'll won't get as many views on social media. But are they getting the full smart meter treatment like I'm getting? Well, I figured out why. And it's because of my work researching psychopaths, the word they wanted to extinguish. But let me keep going on this train of thought here. So good old Magnus Hirschfeld, a known liar now, right? becomes a well-known, renowned expert. During its existence, thousands of patients were seen and treated, often for free. The Institute also achieved a global reputation for its pioneering work on transsexual understanding and calls for equality for homosexuals, transgender people, and women. Hirschfeld himself was a passionate advocate for homosexual rights and had long appealed for the repeal of paragraph 175, the law that criminalized homosexuality in Germany. This Sexology Institute was the very first place the German Student Union, the group that did the book burning, targeted. It all started with the Sexology Institute. They burned a lot of books, but it's of note that they started with the sexology books. This sexual deviancy is coupled with the radical left-right split noticed in Weimar. National Socialists and Communists often battled in the streets. A rise in venereal diseases, widespread prostitution, including abuse, criminal gangs, a known reputation for dealing drugs, degenerate art, rapid technological development, modernism, and a rapid decaying social fabric. While nearly all of this illegal homosexuality, prostitution, etc., it was not enforced. There was tolerance for this behavior despite the law. Interestingly, the degeneracy of Weimar is not so far off from our own degeneracy. Some people like to claim that we have it worse, but each ailment we have, Weimar also had. The parallels with Weimar are striking indeed, except instead of being quarantined in a one-state nation, it is being prolific across all of Western civilization. What that means for us in the long term is still uncertain. The sad reality of the situation is that the entirety of Western civilization is closer to Weimar than most on both the right and the left would prefer to admit. So now I'm going to be talking about retribution. Didn't know the word. Retribution. I guess if you studied the Bible, you would know, but retrobation in Christian theology is a doctrine which teaches that a person can reject the gospel to a point where God in turn rejects them and curses their conscience. Now, keep in mind, the true definition for a psychopath is the absence of a conscience, okay? Even the psychopath researchers and I agree on that part, okay? So, the English word reprobate is from the Latin root probare, which gives the Latin participle, it means reprove or condemned. So, in Christian doctrine, when a sinner is so hardened as to feel no remorse or misgiving of conscience for particularly vile acts, it is considered a sign of retribution. So, according to Christian doctrine, when a sinner is so hardened as to feel no remorse or misgivings of conscience for particularly vile acts, it is considered a sign of retribution. That's REPROBATION. This doctrine does not stipulate that because of a reprobate's wicked deeds that God will not save them. And listen to this very carefully, but rather that God has effectively, permanently withdrawn his offer of salvation by giving them over to a seared conscience. And now they are a reprobate, capable of willingly committed these certain sins not common among mankind. So basically, what it's saying is God saying, hey, I'm done with you. You are a reprobate. So I'm getting so much help, it is almost incredible. I thought I was seeing things when I saw this thing because I've been saying all along, the so-called psychopath researchers are psychopaths themselves. And they even kind of gave themselves away to me because I was buzzing along. And remember, on my book, I have two psychopath researchers who wrote the foreword to my book. Well, believe me, there were a lot of red flags when they were writing that foreword because I was pretty amazed at their lack of ability to write clearly. Because the first foreword they turned into me it was just like, I mean, it was like, I thought a couple of kids had put it together, but it was these two famous researchers, right? So I made some additions. What I did was they just gave me this blob of text. So I went in and I straightened it out, put it into order so you could read it, paragraphs and stuff, right? They like to write in these long run-on sentences. That's because they just want to trick us, right? So the first thing I did was I put it into some paragraphs. Well, the one guy's reaction was so bizarre that what happened was that I decided that I was not going to be communicating with them directly, and that in order to get this project done, it was probably better if I turned the whole thing over to the editor that I'd hired, because clearly I set something off in this person, right? so, so yeah, I was pretty amazed at how their poor writing skills, and these are their most educated ones, right? Because what had happened was this. Carl Gacono and I go back many years. What happened, I met him after I first met Robert Hare. Robert Hare is the leading world expert in psychopaths. When I was living in Sedona, I actually flew to one of their first meetings that they had of all these researchers meeting about psychopaths. And I was pretty amazed at that meeting, how little they talked about. Because from day one, I have always been concerned about the people sitting next to us, right? The psychopaths amongst us. And the whole conference was about them and prison studies, right? Well, Bob Hare tricked the world by his prison studies because what he did was he said that, well, there's only a couple percentage of them in the entire population. So people now think that, well, there's not that many of them. So why are you so worried, right? So, yeah, garbage in, garbage out, right? So literally, Robert Hare was the one who got this whole thing going. And if you want to go look at my main page on my website, I lay out exactly how Robert Hare got his information. Well, he got all of his research information from Cleckley. Cleckley was another agent. Cleckley wrote the book, The Mask of Sanity. Cleckley also did a lot of other insane things. He also was in the vitamin business for a while. Cleckley was in mental institutions giving children coma therapy with high levels of, putting people in a coma for weeks at a time, psychiatric patients. Cleckley was also involved in the military rations to make sure they were probably as deadly as possible. So yeah, Cleckley came from a really horrific past, right? And you will read in their own words, as a matter of fact, Carl Gacono wrote in the foreword to my book, which took me a while to catch on to what he was really saying. He said that we have based our work on the work of Cleckley. And when I read that, when I was reviewing things a couple of years ago, I thought, holy crap. I thought for a while that Cleckley really did do some decent work, right? I thought that Robert Hare was the one who spun things in the other direction. But no, it's been the plan all along because they did not want anybody to know the word psychopath. So long story short, so all along these years, so after I went to this conference, somehow I met Carl Gacono. And so for all these years, I had this idea that Carl was one of the good guys, right? Well, he had a few red flags, which I'll get into maybe sometime later, but anyway, so so we had a good relationship, Carl and I did. Matter of fact, at one point we talked about joining together to write a book about victims because interestingly enough, they know nothing about victims because they just create them, right? So Carl was interested in my work because of my work with victims. Well, I finally figured out more about Carl because I said around early 2020, a lot of things became just so obvious to me, right? Well, out of the blue, I get an email from Carl because remember, along the way, this was going on for years, probably since, I don't know, the last 14 or 15 years that I knew Carl and this whole group of people, right? Early on, Robert Hare and them wanted to join my forum. Luckily, it didn't work out. But anyway, so all these years I'm thinking, yeah, Bob Hare is definitely a psychopath. That other gang, obviously problematic. They're focused on criminals and not the people in front of us, right? And then I found out that Robert Hare got his idea to do the book about psychopaths. He's from Canada. He was over in, somehow he got invited to some NATO meeting. And at that NATO meeting, he came away with the idea to research psychopaths. No, he came away with the idea how to bury the information about psychopaths. That's exactly how it worked. And yeah, during that conference, I was supposed to have Bob Hare and we were communicating by that point. I was supposed to have lunch with him. I have to tell you, and maybe I'll have time to tell the story later, but it was one of the weirdest experiences of my life meeting Bob Hare. By the time I was flying home to Sedona on the plane out of there, the meeting was in Florida. I thought, holy crap, Bob Hare is a psychopath. So along the way, I confided that in Carl. So all these years, Carl was sort of in agreement. He never said, no, you're wrong. He's not a psychopath, right? So that's why I got Carl to write the foreword to my book, because I thought, well, Carl's not one of them, right? Well, turns out he is, because out of the blue in 2020, everything became crystal clear. One of the things that became crystal clear was out of the blue, totally out of the blue. Haven't communicated with Carl in a long time, okay? Out of the blue, early 2020, he sends me an email and he says, Bob Hare is not a psychopath. I thought, where the hell is that coming from, right? So I stopped what I was doing and I looked closer at Carl. And I found a lot of things which I considered quite alarming. You know, like the story he had told me about the sudden disappearance of his wife and his life with his son. And yeah, so certainly a lot of things about Carl came into my focus when I went back to look at early 2020, right? Well, I thought, why is he saying this out of the blue? And that's all he said was Bob Hare is not a psychopath, because he was trying to clear himself up from our previous conversations, obviously, right? So then I buzz over to Robert Hare's website, and well, there it is right there. Robert Hare says he's retiring, and guess who's going to take over his workload? Well, the evaluations are going to be referred to Carl Gacono and a few other researchers. So it's kind of funny that all of a sudden Carl writes to me and says Bob's not a psychopath, and then within 2 minutes I figure out that, well, yeah, because Bob's retiring and Carl wants to take over his business. So anyway, so back to the subject of psychopaths and reprobates. So this morning I'm thinking about all this stuff, right? Well, no, actually, I can't remember this morning or last night, doesn't matter. So I run across this piece and it says there is a great documentary by Verita Baptist Church that relates the Christian reprobates to scientism's psychopaths. So they're talking about they relate the Christian reprobates to scientism psychopaths. They are practically the same thing, except the Bible knew about them thousands of years ago, whereas our modern science and the experts are just now seeming to catch up. And I actually found this video, which was a documentary by this Baptist church. And the reason I gave you that first part about Robert Hare is because I haven't watched the rest of the documentary. I just found it this morning, a little bit ago. But what I want to point out is the clip is called Psychopath Reprobates, how the biblical teaching of reprobates explains the modern epidemic of psychopaths. So I tracked down a copy of it. It's over on BitChute, and I'll have it linked for down below. And he quotes Robert Hare without knowing that he's a psychopath, right? Because Hare was the one who pushed the 1% deal in society to give us confidence that there weren't many of them, right? And so, yeah, Hare took Cleckley's toxic work and put a trademark on it. Because when I put that piece together, I remember that a few years ago, there's this woman on one of these, I don't know, Quora, and she is a self-proclaimed psychopath. And she's been over there chatting for years, and I run into her often over there. If I ever run into somebody on Quora, it's usually this woman, right? And she's over, I can't remember her name, but she's over there educating people about psychopaths because she claims she is one. Well, I think she's giving out a lot of bad information. But anyway, so here's my point. She has been on a tear for all these years, saying things like, hey, Robert Hare is a bunch of garbage. He just trademarked Cleckley's work. He never did the work. So I thought it was pretty amusing that this self-proclaimed psychopath was the first person who brought this to my attention several years ago. So, because until I read that quote about Cleckley that Carl Gacono wrote for my book, I hadn't really connected with this person over on Cure who was running around blabbing about all these years. Because years ago, somebody said, hey, you should probably go over to Cura and build up an audience. No, not really. But anyway, so that's how I found this woman years ago. And I found it pretty amusing. She's been tirelessly over there talking about Bob Hare is a liar and he stole Cleckley's work. So you never know where you're going to find information. So what is this reprobate in simpler terms? As a noun, it means a person rejected by God and beyond hope of salvation. The adjective rejected by God and beyond hope of salvation. Of God to reject a person as for sin, exclude from the number of the elect or from salvation. So in other words, exclude them from everything, right? So reprobates is the word we're looking. If you're called a reprobate, that means you're on the outside. You're not on the inside, right? You're not a good person. So the title of this sermon is called Psychopath Reprobates. You will say, what does this mean? You will say, what is the point of the sermon? I'll give you the point. They're trying to accomplish in this sermon, and what they do is they go through the biblical things, okay, about how the Roman 1 and Romans is really the quintessential passage to the doctrine of reprobates. And they say the reprobate doctrine is taught all through Scripture. And so, they say, what is a reprobate? We see the teachings here in Roman 1. Now, I want you to understand that we could do an entire sermon just on the subject of reprobates. And I'm not going to try to do this morning. This is somebody else talking. I'm going to go through that as quickly as I can. Reprobates. Number one, you need to understand that they were exposed to and had an opportunity to receive the truth. These understand that they were exposed to and had these are not people who never had an opportunity to be saved, never had an opportunity to hear the truth. They were at one point exposed to the truth. They did have an opportunity to receive the truth. Look at verse 18, Romans 1:18. For the wrath of God, notice these words, is revealed. For the wrath of God is revealed from heaven. I want you to notice that the idea is that heaven or nature reveals the wrath of God. For the wrath of God is revealed from heaven against all ungodliness and unrighteousness of men. Notice this phrase, who hold the truth. So notice it's not that they don't have the truth. It's not that they weren't exposed to it. They were told the truth unrighteously in the verse. So basically, what they're saying is they're not just being like kicked out of the group and being called reprobates. They have been told the truth. They don't want to accept the truth. And I went on to say, so I want you to notice that these people have been exposed to the truth. They don't have a conscience inside of them that tells them that there is a God. And by the way, people by nature don't, people by nature believe there is no God. They have to be taught there is no God. By nature, people believe in a God. Well, I think a lot of us believe in something beyond ourselves, right? A creator or something like that. Personally, I kind of refuse to look too deeply into this God deal because I believe it has been polluted into being satanic. But I'm going to give you all the information that I have available because they go on to say, see, they are exposed to the truth. They have an opportunity to receive the truth. They chose to reject the truth. And eventually, after they reject over and over and over, God eventually chooses to reject them and they become a reprobate. Our ruling class, the centralizers, are reprobates. Perhaps the most obvious example of a reprobate are the rulers, the 1%. This is exactly why they hate us, why they want to destroy everything, and why they are full of envy, murder, strife, deceit, malice. It is also why they are without understanding, untrustworthy, and unmerciful. Review of the 2 years of COVID tyranny is a recent example. Once you truly grasp the extent of the psychopath reprobate doctrine, you immediately recognize how everything else surrounding us makes sense. God gave them over to a reprobate mind. They are quite literally evil clowns, which then fully explains why we live under a clown world that makes little sense without understanding. That venerates degeneracy, give hearty approval to those who have practiced degeneracy, and actively attempts to destroy people that are just trying to do good. Their mind is so depraved, given over to depravity, that they cannot think rationally or logically as we do, which is why their actions do not make sense to us. But when we view the actions in the context of reprobates, it all makes sense. Why they hate us, why they are such a cultural degenerate force, and why they regularly fail at everything they attempt. I'm going to close this off for now. I have some links down below. I just have a couple for you to take a look at. One is our silence permits perpetrators to continue. We need to engage in some activism. We can't just sit silently. Their options are few. Most of these kids get charged with prostitution and the traffickers walk free. These kids are not meeting strangers to get trafficked. Most all of these cases involve someone known to the child or family. All they want is one adult to care. Will that person be you? We can start by hearing this brave woman's story and understanding how trafficking of children is all around us. Hollywood has sold us a bad idea about trafficking. Current laws are not there to protect the children. That is the plan, not the bug in the system. This person, Mary McDowell, if you're even remotely interested in helping children, hear her story. She was a lonely kid. Parents weren't hearing her. Got trafficked by a friend. Hear her story. Understand how it works. No one is protecting these kids. Sure, there's probably some cops that will help you to protect them. There are ways we can help these kids. There are ways we can do more than just sit here in silence and watch them get trafficked. She explains exactly what to look for in these kids. The least we could do is spend that hour to listen to Mary's story and learn from A to Z exactly how this happened. I am just learning for myself. I feel a great deal of shame that I'm just now getting to this subject. I also have a clip down there. I believe 100% that the military is a cult. I have found a wonderful conversation that I got about halfway through last night. It's very interesting. It's two ex-cult members who were also active military, and they're discussing, is the U.S. military a cult? Well, I don't like to hide the ending. Of course it's a cult, but it's very fascinating to hear this conversation, and I'm looking forward to hearing the rest of it later today. I also have the link for some information called Understanding the Reprobate, and also psychopath retrogrades. I found a copy of that clip over on BitChute. I also found a copy of that clip over on the Wayback Machine, the Internet Archive. Our silence permits perpetuators to continue. That's as simple as that. It's really as simple as that. Solidarity is a key. Solidarity. And we can't help to protect what we don't have a clue what we're looking for. Why is it that just in 1999 they just started introducing laws against child trafficking? Why is it that right now children are being encouraged to come across this border? Are we all going to fucking sit around and watch it happen? The test of a culture is how we deal with the most vulnerable in our own society. I'm going to close this off for now. I have a lot more to say about Weimar. Today's not the day. I'll be back as soon as I can with that. Be safe out there. Goodbye for now.